host these events. And Dora Faye is out today. She's absolutely fine, but she is traveling and wasn't able to get on the presentation today. So, so I'm here with you today. And my name's Kathy Duncan, and I'm the president of the Southwest Seattle Historical Society Board of Trustees. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you to tonight's program. Words Writers Southwest Stories is a free monthly speaker program that highlights local authors, historians, and voices to foster a deeper understanding of our community and its people. This program is generously supported by Humanities Washington and from sustained support from For Culture and the Office of Arts and Culture. Their generosity makes these free experiences possible tonight, so we thank them. And if you'd like to learn more about the Southwest Seattle Historical Society or get updates on next month's speaker, please visit loghousemuseum.org. We'll leave time for your questions at the end of tonight's program, so please feel free to add your questions to the Q&A at any point during the presentation, and we'll get to as many of those questions as we can. Our speakers tonight that we are thrilled to have are Carrie Simpson and Elke Hotala. They formed Invisible Histories in early 2024 to visually and viscerally connect the public to research with an emphasis on experiences from the past. Their Invisible Histories podcast unearths diverse local stories and forgotten places. They've been featured on media outlets such as King 5 Evening and the Seattle Times and presented for many organizations from Seattle University to King County and the Pacific Northwest Historians Guild. And you can learn more at invisiblehistories.com. That's invisible-histories.com. And you can find that link on the Loghouse Museum website. So, ladies, I will turn it over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much. We're so excited. I was saying that a lot of times when we do this live, we start with a seance, but this time we're just going to do a little bit of theatricality. We've toned it down just a bit. So,
but if you want to be part of a seance, we'll give you a link on June 20th and 21st when you can participate in a seance with us.
Our live guided tour, we'll tell you about that at the end. And without further ado, we'll add our imagery here, and Carrie can go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, so picture it. You are a recent immigrant or transplant from elsewhere in the United States, living in West Seattle in 1905. You're excited to try out the new streetcar railway system that just opened, and you go over to Seattle for the day, maybe for work or some fun. And along the way, unfortunately, you unexpectedly die. Maybe from an accidental or fatal injury or foul play. There were so many ways to die back then. And you have no identification on you, and no one comes to claim your body. And back in West Seattle, maybe a few people are wondering where you are, but they have no way to track you down. Maybe you're living in a boarding house or living on someone's farm in exchange for labor. They just assume you've moved on, as people did back then. And so after 3 days, King County Coroner Hoy has to make the very difficult decision of what to do with your body. And so that's how you could find yourself buried at the Duwamish Cemetery, also known as the Potter's Field in 1905, anonymously laid to rest between yesterday and tomorrow's dead on a desolate point of land next to King County's Poor Farm, with only a number on a post marking your final resting place. So welcome to our presentation about Seattle's Lost Cemetery, a Potter's Field along the Duwamish River. And this map is from 1907. We're going to talk about it more, but it's overlaid on top of, I believe, like the 1937 aerial photo, just to show kind of the change in the river, which will be part of our story.
Okay. Dun, dun, dun.
So we unexpectedly, I guess, became historical researchers and approached this mystery. So during my time, and have to give a big shout out to Friends of Georgetown History. So I had been part of the history tour and then was welcome to be the producer of the Georgetown Haunted History Tour starting in 2021. And over the years had heard many a tale of bodies being dumped in the river or ashes being scattered across the fields. And a lot of people knew about the Comet Lodge Cemetery, which is in kind of upper Georgetown on Graham Street. But this was a different place. There were these stories of ashes being scattered in the river, and those have haunted the haunted tour for years. And people had remembered something about a cemetery near the old King County Poor Farm and Hospital, but the details were few. Was any of this true? Just neighborhood lore? Who knows? And then during the pandemic, on the verge of death by boredom, I happened to find this 1905 map, which you can see on the screen right now. This was an Army Corps like planning map, and you can see the curves of the Duwamish going like this. And then you can see that the Army Corps has literally taken a ruler and drawn the future path of the river. And on this map, if you kind of zoom in at the bottom, it says County Graveyard. And I just, the minute I saw this map and saw that someone had taken the time to write County Graveyard, it was like, boop, like all the things came together of this neighborhood lore and, what had happened here. And led down this huge rabbit hole, meeting Elka and leading us to be with you tonight. So, yeah. So tonight we're going to talk about what happened to this Duwamish Cemetery, also known as the Potter's Field or the County Graveyard, and how does actually a cemetery disappear? Like, how does that even happen? And so over the next few slides, we're going to walk through some maps that kind of show the evolution of this part of Seattle. Going back to the beginning of when the glacier retreated 14,000 years ago up through today. And just, I love maps, got maps behind me everywhere
Yes.
around me. And maps totally lie, right? And they're written by the conqueror, but they also can point to what's been hidden or forgotten in such a demonstrative way in this case, right? Like someone took the time to write something on there, and after that, it was never written on a map again. So this was a chance seeing this map. Yeah.
The mystery to solve. But allow me to just interject quickly before we head into all the exciting maps that Carrie's going to tell you about and talk a little bit about how Carrie and I met and one of our first experiences here really digging into this story. So I'm a visual anthropologist and a lifelong performing artist. And Carrie and I found we had a lot of great synergy together because she works in the environmental side of things and really looks at landscape and the evolution of it. I really love digging into people's stories and seeing how things have evolved through that kind of narrative through line. And I was doing a project on access to the Duwamish River and the issues surrounding that. Some of you may know the Duwamish River is a Superfund site. So I was looking at dreams of people who were helping the Duwamish River. I asked Carrie to pose on a paddleboard. She does a trash pickup in the Duwamish River. I came to cover that. It was amazing. And so she said, well, hey, I had this old map that I found, and I have this mystery about County Graveyard. Do you want to help me solve that? And I was like, yes, you had me at County Graveyard. And so the rest is history, as we say. And not too long into our time working together with Friends of Georgetown History, she was producing, and I did some skits with them as well. Theatricality is one of my specialties. Well, we decided where can we go to try to find more information. We started reaching out to all the different archival places we could find. And one of the ones that we first got our biggest like hit on was basically King County Archives. Shout out to Danielle Coyle there. We highly recommend it. Lots of great stuff there, and they're always willing to help you. Now, we went during the pandemic. We have been doing this research project, this multimodal research project for multiple years now, and just diving into different aspects of it and different iterations. So we went during the pandemic, and it was very surreal. I mean, it was still sort of that time period when we were like, should we be here? Should we? And there were all kinds of restrictions. But one of the really cool things we found was this 1912 exhumation registry. 1912 was the year actually that they took out all of the bodies and cremated them. More about that later, because they were moving into the next phase of dredging, straightening, and channelizing the Duwamish River. The only problem was the cemetery was in the way. So all the people had to go. And this was an amazing record that we found that has the names of any people that they had names for. You can see the images up on the screen were ones that we took at the archives there. So you can see what this document, this book was essentially titled on the left. In the middle here are some of the listings that actually did have people's names in that beautiful cursive that kids nowadays can't even read easily. I have to trying to teach that one still. And they don't have much detail though, usually aside from the date that they were buried there. And the page on the far right is the few people that they had a little bit more information about. So some detail maybe about them. I think one even says like that they're buried in a special casket.
Yeah,
That was
these
the
were all ones
exception.
that actually had marker, like real stones, like a tomb, some kind of carved marble or yeah, I actually was able to read the cursive. So
Yes, which is good.
and some people were, I think, taken and put some of the people here on this last page may have been moved to like Lakeview or some other cemetery, but who knows? We're not sure. I think that's still a mystery of whatever.
Still a mystery.
Yeah.
So one of the important things to realize though is that out of the 3,260 people, only 855 had names, and there were 493 with numbers that they were given, and then 1,912 with no mark, headboard, or numbers. And it's just an incredible amount. So these statistics were really glaring evidence of this sort of mistreatment of the people who were living on the margins at the time and who were buried there. And so it really lit a fire under us to try to find out more, not only about this mystery and what happened to their ashes, but also try to shed some light on who were these people, at least the ones that we could try to follow the threads of the names. So moving along here and now to the maps.
Yeah. And just a note, like we can't hear anybody, obviously.
So
And I'm not sure about chatting or if people have specific questions. I guess we'll just get through the presentation and then take questions at the end. I think that'll be easier. But you can always also email us. We'll give you all of our contact info. And we've connected with Mary Fleck and Judy Bentley before. So like we love to chat about all this stuff. So we're totally happy to like connect with people after today too. So yeah, these are a couple really cool maps. On the right is an image from the Interior Department survey map from 1897, and reprinted in 1918. And this shows sort of topography and the river. You can see the windy Duwamish River, the huge mud flat where now is Soto and Harbor Island. So I just love this map, and the arrows pointing to where the Poor Farm generally is located. Today, it's where the South Seattle College Georgetown campus is, so East Marginal and Corson. And then on the right, or sorry, on the left is a overlay made by Elmer Shake from the University of Washington. This is an 1862 government land office survey map overlaid with today's satellite street grid. And inside the double-lobed shape, which is now the Georgetown neighborhood, is land that was known as King County. It wasn't part of Seattle yet, and what became King County Poor Farm and Hospital. And so this was this point of land that was mentioned. Well, yeah, and then findagrave.com was also really a great research point for us because there is actually a listing for this Duwamish cemetery on findagrave.com. And so they actually had a description on their call that said the Duwamish Cemetery, 1876 to 1912, was located on a knoll overlooking the Duwamish River at the King County Hospital and Poor Farm. And so because of that description, the Army Corps map, seeing this sort of double lobe shape, knowing this was King County property, it kind of like all came together, right? This is where this was. And now basically where the cemetery is under an industrial business today. So very interesting to see the change. So speaking of changes, so this is on the left, this is the 1907 King County Road Services map showing kind of in the upper right corner, you can see these were the buildings of the King County Poor Farm. So like the farmhouse, the barn, there were some little outbuildings. Actually, I don't know if you can see my pointer. There's a kind of cross-shaped building. That was the crematory that the county built It wasn't built yet in 1907, but somehow they put it on this map. Anyway, it was built in 1912, and you can see it over here on the one on, oh, shoot, don't touch it. You can also see this is called Charleston Avenue at the time. Now we know it as Corson Avenue. And then this East Marginal Way did not exist at this point, but they had platted it out. So essentially the county knew that the Army Corps needed to straighten and dredge the river, which at this point, even in 1907, and they knew after the dredging and straightening was done, they'd be able to sell this, what had been sort of useless land, into these industrial tracts and essentially make money. So it was a little bit of a, you know, industrial development scheme in a way, and definitely displacing the cemetery and part of the farm. So then you can see on the map on the right, so this is the road services map from 1912. You can see the Potter's Field is gone. Now it's King County Industrial Tracts. And you can see they like X'd out the greenhouses and like part of the orchard. And yeah, this big crematory is there. And that was built, we'll talk about it in a minute, but it was built specifically to cremate the 3,260 remains from the Potter's Field. Plus, going forward in 1912, it was where people could either pay to be cremated or be cremated for free if they were unable to pay. So,
All right.
yeah, and I think too, we have one more.
Here we go.
Yeah, this, I love this map. The orientation's different. So now Corson Avenue is running across the bottom, today's Corson Avenue. You can see again, this is the Poor Farm complex. The farm building is still there. The barn is still there. The fields and orchards, the crematory is still there. East Marginal Way is running like this. You can see they've dredged the Duwamish River. So like now the waterway, they call it waterway number 2, or cross out the 2 and put the 1. I mean, men were literally marking up the land on these maps and then taking it out into the world and like reshaping the world around them in a crazy way. So the other cool thing just to note on here, this little, on the corner of Corson and East Marginal, this little diamond shaped property was platted for a gas station, and thus became the Texas Hat and Boots gas station property. Today, the Hat and Boots have moved down the street to Oxbow Park, thanks to Friends of Georgetown History and lots of community people getting involved. But just the, like, even before that business arrived, they had actually said this was going to be a gas station. So interesting. And then one final map. Oh, oops. This one was made by an archaeologist, local archaeologist named Eric Anderson, who himself had done similar research that we had, but like 15 years ago. He had made this overlay, which is just great. It just shows this old 1907 map colored in the Potter's Field, and then you can see the property of the, you know, college. You can see where the Georgetown neighborhood is, and then today's industrial, like this part of Georgetown where this is happening is like nobody would go there. It's like there's no, unless you're going to Seattle Iron and Metals to like scrap your refrigerator or your car, like you never would drive down the street. And so it's just really interesting that we've now spent a lot of time back there.
Yes, for better or worse. I know connecting with Eric was really amazing too, because he had done some prior research on this, although not as in depth. And so we really felt like when we saw what he had done and your comparison to what you had done, and we were like, oh my gosh, yes, we're really honing in on these spaces and identifying them. So laid the groundwork for the future.
And if you want to go visit this location, type into your mapping app 500 South Myrtle Street, and that will take you to this street end at the end of Myrtle Street. Yes, Seattle Iron and Metal will be on your left. Seattle Boiler Works will be on your right, both, you know, active businesses. So during the day, it's a little kind of crazy down there. The river is right there. The old Emerald Queen Casino, original Emerald Queen Casino, is on the river across.
Cool.
So like it's a surreal
It is.
space. So highly recommend it if you're out and about and want to go explore.
Or come on the tour, right? Which will be the nice thing here. Okay, so this is the evolution of the King County Poor Farm. I mean, one question we ask ourselves was just how does one end up in the Duwamish Poor Farm Cemetery, right? And you were often on the margins of society, without money or means, and two key places really emerged here. One was the King County Poor Farm, which you see in this very sensationalized portrait. It looks almost like a southern plantation here. And this, I have to say, this one was, I say possibly King County Poor Farm, because I think it was identified as potentially being the Poor Farm from 1877. That would have been so early, though. It's really like right around the time
But
they
I
were
think the
starting.
farmhouse was there already. It was
Oh,
actually the Mr. Thompson's farm
that's right, 'cause it was,
before even the county took
that's
over the
true. So
land. Yeah.
maybe it could have looked more like that. I guess I feel like it looks so much like a southern plantation almost or something. So yes, that's the Seattle Public Library picture there. And not only, we do want to thank Terry Mitchell, former Providence Hospital archivist. Thank you, Mary Fleck and Judy Bentley, for turning us on to that, because
Mhm.
that really helped us establish this timeline of the circuitous route that this evolution took. I mean, initially we thought, hey, it just, it became the King County Poor Farm and Hospital and pretty much stayed that way. But that is definitely not the case. It did all start with the best of intentions that the county must take care of their poor. So there was an 1854 law that stated this, but the question became, how do they accomplish that? The King County Board of Commissioners would set a formal meeting to individually deal with what they called pauper cases back then. And some of their solutions seem misguided, to say the least, through a modern lens. There was a June 3rd, 1856 auction where pauper Edward Moore was essentially sold. As Mitchell states, the lowest bidder agreed to provide shelter and food for the person in need in exchange for payment from the county and use of the person's labor if he or she was able to work. Now, they had some early doctors contracted to help the sick, but they also paid to send poor away to places like San Francisco and Hawaii. So, this whole idea of out of sight, out of mind, right? And there was a dramatic increase in those who needed help. It led to the decision, essentially, because they had a lot of people moving to the area at that time, and it was, still the frontier in a lot of ways. So it led to the decision to institute the poor farm where people without means could work. This is the idea behind it. They could work and they could create some self-sufficiency through farming, right? The system was supposed to teach morals and skills, but it also benefited the commissioners, let's remember, by creating this idea of a compulsory system that stepped away from this case by case review basis, basically. Okay, so we initially thought once it was put into place, as they said, that it was pretty much set, but ownership changed hands quite a bit. And we've learned that this was not the case. It was this circuitous route. So there was much more fluctuation over the lifespan. I'll just encapsulate it a little bit because obviously we have a lot of interesting stuff to get through. It all started with one woman, Mother Joseph of the Sacred Heart, or more accurately, a group of women, French Canadian nuns to be exact. And before we leave this picture, I'll just mention that over on the right hand side of the screen, we have their drawing, their watercolor drawing here of the poorhouse space early on from the Sisters of Providence. So moving over here, we have a wonderful Ashel Curtis photo here of the hospital. So King County had assumed ownership of this 160 acres of farmland 5 miles south of Seattle. As Carrie had mentioned, it was from John Thompson, who had died without heirs in 1869 and part of the original Luther M. Collins claim. The commissioners visited this in 1877 and they found it well suited to their purposes. But there was pushback about this idea. I mean, in many ways, it had been discredited already on the East Coast as a social welfare tool, as Terry Mitchell states. But with increase in population and those in need, they decided to move full steam ahead. Now they just needed someone to run it. Enter Mother Joseph. So they accepted Father Emil Cowton's bid of $300 a year and 75 cents per person per day. And then he arranged for the Sisters of Providence, who were from Montreal, to run it with their leader, Mother Joseph. So they had already established hospitals and schools in areas nearby, like Vancouver, Washington, Portland, and Steilacoom. And Mother Joseph is a really interesting character. Mary Fleck can tell you way more about her. I bet she was said to be unafraid of doing what needed to be done and famously wielded a hammer while wearing her habit, fixing what needed to be taken care of herself if needed. I love that mental image. So they did treat 31 people in 14 months, mostly immigrants, but it was not an easy life. They had a separate sleeping annex to make sure there was space for the patients. They faced isolation, loneliness, and hard labor at times. And they even faced prejudice from patients who preferred not to be treated by foreign Catholic nuns. By July 1878, they basically had enough. They had gotten approval to move patients to a larger facility at Fifth Avenue in Madison that undoubtedly was much more to their liking. So for almost a decade after that, we have this back and forth whenever the contract came up for review, but the farm stayed as a farm primarily, and the sisters kept taking care of the poor at the hospital. In November 1886, the commissioners decided to transfer care back to the farm, and the sisters felt this was likely due to prejudice. And this is a quote from the Providence Chronicles. We deplore the decision because our poor and elderly patients would have to leave us and once more be taken care of by Protestants. By 1888, Dr. Charles Merrick was running the poor farm and even burying the dead at no extra charge, no doubt, in the Duwamish Poor Farm Cemetery. So the building on the right-hand side of the screen was built in 1895 at the request of the farm's third managing physician, and the farm then became separated from those in need of medical care once again. Still with me? It goes back and forth a lot. Within a year, it was providing a good amount of food for the hospital. The Post Intelligencer in June 1895 talked about its bounty: 16 acres of potatoes, berries, apples, beans, peas, peaches, and more. I do want to highly recommend the Washington State Historical Society collection there with the Ashel Curtis ones. They're trying to digitize all of them. Now there's even more that haven't been digitized yet. And we'll have another wonderful image coming up here as well. But produce aside, what was it like to actually live and die there? I feel like this name Poor Farm conjures up images of Dickensian austerity, right? So some there were old, some blind, most feeble, some were temporarily disabled young men. They had in Walter Defenbaugh, who wrote this article on the right-hand side of the screen, Over the Hill to the Poorhouse in 1907. He wrote that article in his words. They had saloons and mocking real estate signs on one side and the wet, winding river and dreary pines on the other side. About 30 people on the 90-acre farm at that time, and they would have to work, weed, prepare vegetables. At that time, they had about 140 in the hospital, give or take, and those who could work there had to work too in the kitchen, scrubbing the floors, sweeping, watering the lawn, almost all men. In a striking quote highlighting women of a certain age's long struggle for agency and visibility, Mr. Defenbaugh says, there is no good place in this country to send an unfortunate old lady whose only affliction is her years and her inability to earn a living. But there was something even worse going on during this time. There was a silent killer in their ranks, striking fear into the hearts of all. But it wasn't a person. By 1900, Seattle had one of the highest incidences of tuberculosis per capita in the United States. I was surprised to find out that. And patients with communicable diseases, including influenza, were sent here to the other image on the screen, another wonderful Ashel Curtis photo of the hospital and tuberculosis sanatorium. And the Georgetown Sanatorium housed patients on land surrounding the King County Hospital from 1903 to 1911. And I did say on land surrounding, not in the actual hospital, because due to the medical understanding and practices of the time, patients were housed in open air tents, which you can see on platforms in that image, backed up over the Duwamish River and on top of the drain pipes. This is also from the Seattle Daily Times, a quote, poor fellas who lie all day in the big day and all night in the big tents out along the riverbank with the curtains pulled up high on every clear day, not a passing human being to break the monotony, nothing but the petty little lapping of the foolish river to make one moment different from the next, and no one to care whether the moment 3 heartbeats away will be their last. There were 16 men there at the time of this article, and not just American, but British, Scandinavian, Filipino, and Japanese. Some couldn't even speak English. Most people died coughing in the cold, foggy, foul conditions by the river. Then, unless a family member came to claim the body, they were buried in the Potter's Field, just along the shoreline to the right of this photo, which that's been our holy grail to try to find a picture
Yeah.
of the Potter's Field. We still hold out hope that somewhere in the Ashel Curtis
Yeah.
collection, there's picture there. But the Seattle Star newspaper did an investigative report, which led to a grand jury investigation that found the conditions inhumane and the management horrific. The silver lining in all this was that it eventually did lead to reforms, like the Anti-Tuberculosis League, formed in the very year of this picture, 1909, and which led to the King County Public Health creating a new sanatorium in Fircrest, just north of the city and north of Seattle, in the city of Shoreline. And moving on here. Oh,
Yeah.
here's one of our famous
So
residents.
yeah, so we did, with the help of some volunteers, Patty and her sister Rose, we started looking through the names of the 855 people with names, obviously, that were buried at the Potter's Field, and actually Find a Grave also has some information. And so we're going to show you a couple people who were buried at the Potter's Field.
Oh, I think we're just doing one person today.
Oh, we are. Okay, that's great. So
there are lots more.
yeah, this one is worthy of a noir, like a Northwest noir. Like if someone wants to make a film about this person's life, I think it would be amazing. So
I do.
So this is Thomas Hamilton Blank. You can see his picture there on the left, the little newspaper sketch, drawn as a young man wearing a dark suit and light colored hair. He was born in New York and known as the Jesse James of the Pacific Northwest. So just remember, like this was 1895. Seattle was a very Wild West town still. We had not the temperance movement, the suffragette movement, like all these things had not yet happened. And literally there were gunfights in the streets and men drinking their paychecks away, and very few women in the city at that point. So that was sort of the backdrop. And obviously the West, the cowboy and the bandit, the train robbers of the lore of the West was definitely some stories that people really resonated with. And so he kind of fit that archetype. And I think people really liked to learn about it. So October 1894, he had been convicted in King County Superior Court of the murder of a bartender named Charles Bridwell and sentenced to hang on December 7th, but somehow his case was appealed and his execution was stayed. So he must have had a good lawyer. He probably came from money. He spent his nights in the Katzenjammer Castle, which is pictured here on the right, which was Seattle's second city hall, photographed here in 1909. This picture shows the Third Avenue facade of the Seattle City Hall with its many seemingly haphazard additions. The doors are open to the fire station on the center of the right picture below the stand and molding. That same year, most of the city offices moved to the new public safety building. And the Katzenjammer name came from a cartoon of the era called the Katzenjammer Kids. For any old timers on the call that love cartoons, that's where that came from. So while in jail, picture the scene. He's in the jail over 3 months, secretly crafting a replica Smith & Wesson double action revolver, which was his favorite weapon. Using a knife made from a steel shank in his shoe, Blank whittled and shaped the pieces, then smoothed them with pieces of broken glass. The model was held together with matchsticks and thread, chewing gum and soap, blackened with a mixture of grease and soot. To add authenticity, Blank fabricated realistic bullets from pieces of tobacco-packed tinfoil and inserted them into the face of the cylinder. Having painstakingly worked on the project for 3 months, he was now ready to implement his escape plan. 7:30 p.m., Sunday, March 17th, 1895. Night jailer Jerry Yerbury, age 39, left the jailer's office and approached the pass-through in the steel tank to deliver a nightly dose of medicine to a prisoner. Pulled the imitation gun from under his shirt, stuck it through the bars, and told the jailer to surrender or be immediately killed. He tied up the jailer, stole his gun, escaped, and for the next 5 days, they played cat and mouse with the police from Seattle to Kent and Auburn. He was ultimately killed in a shootout with police. The coroner also determined he was slowly dying of pneumonia from being on the run in the cold Pacific Northwest elements. According to
We're
Seattle.
losing, sorry,
Oh,
we're losing a little bit of the sound as you sit back.
oh, okay.
Make sure you're close enough to
Okay.
the mic. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Yeah, thank you
Sorry.
for so according to Seattle Post-Intelligencer, at least 18,000 people filed past his coffin at the Butterworth Funeral Parlor on Friday alone. The street in front of the undertaking rooms was crowded from day to early morning into evening. So great was the pressure on the doors. Despite the efforts of the police, the public was admitted long before the intended time. Almost as many women as men took advantage of the opportunity to get a look at the greatest Northwest criminal, and one woman even kissed the corpse. Many who came brought flowers, which were placed in and around the coffin. Blank was unceremoniously buried at the Potter's Field at the end of March 1895 with only a concrete post bearing a registry number. 1 month later, allegedly, Blank's replica revolver was put on display in Port Townsend, where he had once been arrested to raise money for a church charity. And 130 people paid a nickel to view the artifact, netting the charity $6.50. And we did try to track that down by calling the Jefferson County Historical Society. They could not find any record of that. It's probably completely disintegrated at some point, but a very cool story. And despite being a murderer and unceremoniously buried, I think a really interesting story to tell. And yeah.
And there's lots more stories that the people were just sharing that one today in the interest of time. But
Yeah.
Listen to our podcast about the Lost Cemetery if you want to hear more, connect with us, or come on the tour. We'd be happy to share more of them.
Yeah. So we're picking back up. So now it's 1912. And the Poor Farm and the old Potter's Field are slated. Well, the Potter's Field is slated to be removed by the end of the year. So it's the summer of 1912. The county built a crematorium next to the Potter's Field on the land that's now under today's Georgetown campus of South Seattle College, right there on Corson and East Marginal Way. On the left side, you can see the image of the architectural drawings from 1912 and the as-built, including the architect was J.W. Lawton, who also built or designed some buildings on the UW campus. So this was not an ordinary, industrial building. This was a beautiful brick building with rosette windows and copper gutters. They spared no expense. They actually hired the Olmsted brothers to do the landscaping plan in 1913. So you can see kind of the driveway and the planting and all of this. So the county clearly wanted to show that they could spend the proper amount of money to care for the people buried at the Potter's Field. So everything seemed above board, right? I mean,
Yeah.
sounds great on paper. So now it's the end of 1912. Picture it, Seattle in November. Clammy, cold, overcast, the smoky air from the local industries blocking out the meager sun. The county had entered a contract with Mr. Noyce, the undertaker of the Georgetown Funeral Parlor, to disinter all 3,260 people who'd been buried there. In the same time frame, he and Dr. Corson from the King County Hospital also managed the sale of burial plots at the Comet Lodge Cemetery. And we know how that story ended up. So I don't know if Mr. Noyce was actually as good a worker as he thought he was, but maybe better than anyway. So for the Potter's Field, he's tasked with disinterment, cremation, and columbarium storage of bodies from the Duwamish Cemetery. In November, the county hired a crematorium caretaker, so someone working in this building to assist with the cremation and the storage. The new crematorium in Georgetown could also accept fee-based private cremations as well as the 3,260 people. Mr. Noyce began the grim task to exhume all of these bodies, many of which probably were completely what do you call this? Yeah, like degraded. So there would not have been a lot. He supposedly was paid per skull, like $2.50 per skull, but the archaeologists we talked to said it's unlikely there would have been whole bodies left at that point, even people buried 10 years before. So So he starts doing this work. He had 39 days to get all 3,260 people, many of which are decomposed. His contract stipulated that the bodily remains were each to be stored in individual cans and stored in the crematory's columbarium. According to some accounts, the county unfortunately purchased metal cans that were too small. So imagine soup cans versus a baked bean can, which you need for a human adult. And the ashes were being swept into communal piles, and due to the rush job, perhaps a shortage of labor, it all literally became a huge mess. And next slide. So the state auditor actually had to get involved. So now it's the beginning of 1913. What happened to the ashes was deemed beyond understanding in December of 1912. On the left, we show a March 25th, 1913 Post-Intelligencer article, "Say County Let Loose Contract." The reporter wrote that careless and unbusinesslike methods were used, including the ashes of as many as 163 people, raked on the floor of the county crematorium and distributed into individual receptacles purporting to bear the name of each deceased. Well, Mr. Noyce claimed he was only hired to deliver every headboard to the crematory, and if these were destroyed, it was done after they left my possession. The state auditor recommended that the 3,260 receptacles containing mixed ashes of many bodies be discarded, that the ashes be placed in one receptacle, and that the fiction of a name on each can be removed from the columbarium shelves. And that's likely where the neighborhood lore around disposal of the ashes came from, because as of this writing, there is no evidence to explain what happened to the cremated remains of the 3,260 people in 1912. The crematorium continued providing cremations for another 20 years, but was dismantled in 1941 by the National Youth Administration as a training project, with all the equipment and materials salvaged and stored by King County. Can you imagine what might be in the county storage somewhere?
Yes, and we actually had a chance recently. It's going to be our July podcast, but we had a chance to go to the King County Medical Examiner's office
Mhm.
and interview their lead investigator. And one of the big connections there is they have an indigent remains burial ceremony and program that I'll talk a little bit more about in just a bit. So one of the big things we think about is who remembers these stories, places, and people, and is there a space and place for memorialization and remembrance, even if you're passing away on the margins? So, Mary Dugan, oh, let me start with this is the Wayside Mission Hospital, for those of you who know Archives West image. And it actually is another place that you might have been for your final stop before the Potter's Field. A mysterious domestic worker who came up from Portland, Mary Dugan, passed away suddenly here. And one of the first Sikhs in the Pacific Northwest ended up here and passed away. His name was Ingo Singh. And at least for Ingo Singh, we have confirmed the Duwamish Cemetery was where he ended up. Mary Dugan's story is shrouded in mystery. We're not even sure if that was her real name. So that's a story for another day. Formed by the Seattle Benevolent Society in 1899, the first image there is the decommissioned side wheel steamer called the Idaho. And it was being used as a hospital. That location was placed on pilings by Pier C at the foot of Jackson Street, and it served those who couldn't afford medical care or who were dealing with addiction issues. It was not in great shape, as you can see, and so perhaps not surprisingly, they ended up moving to a structure at Second and Republican by 1907, and it closed only 2 years later when the city opened a new 41-room hospital in the public safety building. During the construction of a seawall along Seattle's south waterfront between 1910 to 1920, the Idaho was moved and buried as fill near the foot of Washington Street. So in 1960, on National Maritime Day, a historical marker was placed at the location of its resting place. And the marker reads, "Beneath your feet lies the wreckage of the pioneer sidewheel steamer Idaho, which served from 1900 until 1909 as Dr. Alexander DeSoto's famous Wayside Mission Hospital. Here, Dr. DeSoto ministered to the needs of seafarers and the destitute, donating his time and funds to their care. That description is from the plaque and it's from Archives West. Now we have thousands of tourists and locals walking along the regraded, reshaped, and renovated waterfront without so much as a connection to what has come before. And this is one of the things we think about. We want to create an ephemeral and a built environment space for remembrance for our 3,260 souls. I do especially love the idea that the Idaho is part of the fill, forever holding up the space, just like it supported so many people in the early 1900s. And one quick example here before we move on. Another Potter's Field you're likely to know is Hart Island in New York City. Somewhere between 850,000 to 900,000 poor, homeless, or forgotten people are buried there, making it the largest public cemetery in the world. That's from NewYorkHistory.org. It is a darkly secretive past that reflects many of the tragic seasons of our history, including the HIV/AIDS crisis and more recently, COVID-19. And up until fairly recently, it was off limits to almost all visitors, even if you had someone buried there. And it's now run by the Parks Department, but it was previously run by the Department of Corrections with inmates from Rikers doing all the burial work.
That's
So,
in this picture.
yeah, in the picture
Yeah.
there, right? I mean, it's a startling image. And is it Jacob Reese? I can't remember. It might be a Jacob Reese image. You probably know. I have to look that up. But you can click on, I mean, you can't click on it, but we can share the link with you because this is an amazing example of creating a digital space for remembrance. They're using new media to create an interactive digital map of those buried in the cemetery. And they also have crowdsourcing to create collective memory. So if you know someone that was in the space, you can share information about it. So very cool there. So almost last one here. So we hope this time travel through Seattle's early days and back to the present has sparked some thoughts and consideration about how we honor the lost people from a cemetery erased by progress at all costs. And we're going to welcome questions from the audience after we have just a little bit on the other slide. So I want to make clear, though, that the urgency of these issues are not buried under 100+ years of history. People are facing challenges and passing away at an alarming rate on the margins of our cities today. In fact, we are expanding our research, as we have been, to make additional modern connections with the goal of social impact. So we've interviewed not only the King County Medical Examiner, but share wheel people involved in activism and who have been living on the margins themselves, so we can help share these experiences and stories and humanize them as well. So Women in Black too, they do homeless remembrance vigils. We went to one of those on the steps of Seattle City Hall. They honor unsheltered persons who passed away recently. 22 in this last month of January and this year alone, over 300 a year for the past 3 years. Some statistics about this: the King County Regional Homeless Authority shared during a point in time count in 2024, 16,385 individuals were experiencing homelessness in King County. It was a 23% increase from the point in time count 2 years before. So it just puts everything kind of in perspective. So the silver lining for our story is that the auditor's report and investigative journalism did lead to reforms. Now the King County Medical Examiner has the special indigent burial program, in which they have a lovely public ceremony every 2 years honoring many different faiths, and they keep the remains separated in case a family member does come forward to claim them. We have our picture there of the Gone But Not Forgotten plaque, which honors them, and I do highly recommend going to that if you get a chance. So some of the ways we're thinking about helping people, sharing the invisibility of these spaces. I have this sort of inset image of Hart Island because we are thinking about doing more like augmented reality eventually. Maybe people could do it on mobile phones, but we have our live guided walking tours coming up. They don't have augmented reality yet, but we're getting there. We do have some theatrical stuff with it. And we are welcoming suggestions about what a memorial might look like. And yes, this is a kind of a Google Earth image of the 500 South Myrtle Street area. moving on to our sort
Yeah.
of wrap up.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having us. I guess we can take questions now if,
And thank you to Southwest Historical Society for hosting.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you
This,
for being here with us. So let me go through and I'll read through the
okay.
questions that we have for you guys. Um, have the remains of deceased Indigenous individuals been uncovered at Potter's Field?
I don't think so. Not that we know
Not that we're aware
specifically.
of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's definitely like from talking to local indigenous people like Snohomish tribe or others, Duwamish, people were not buried in the ground unless they had converted to Christianity or Catholicism or um indigenous people would have been interred in the trees prior to contact. So I guess the land where the Potter's Field was had been called a quote unquote Indian burial ground, but we don't know if that was actually true. And of the names, 855, I guess nobody's clearly been identified as a native person. Yeah.
No, but we would love to, if you do have any
Yeah.
suggestions about, and we have been reaching out to some of our contacts to try to understand like kind of the landscape and the death practices of the Coast Salish more. So
Yeah.
great question.
And then the next question, was it a common practice to dissolve public cemeteries on the European continent and in the US?
Actually, you know what is it's so interesting that you have that question because I think I had read recently, this is not an area that we've done a lot of research in to see how universal this experience is. It definitely, the forced industrialization and moving certain things, no matter what they were, definitely, I think is very universal. But
Yeah.
I think I was reading somewhere recently that they actually had, or maybe it was that cemeteries a lot more become abandoned
Mhm.
than we may realize.
Yeah.
And so we are building on top of this type of stuff
Yeah.
more often
I
than.
mean, the Comet Lodge is a good example of that was a privately owned cemetery that essentially the Comet Lodge group sort of dissolved and they stopped taking care of the cemetery. And that's how it became overgrown and the mystery and what happened with the tombstones and the similar, we did a research on a project or a site out in Snohomish, the old Snohomish Pioneer Cemetery, which also I think was privately owned and not part of the town. And so then same thing, over time, people stopped taking care of it. The weeds came in, the trees grew up, and eventually people forgot that it was a cemetery. And then one of the descendants of someone buried there figured out that their ancestors were there and that kind of unearthed that whole story. So that I think it is really common if it was private, because then unless it has an endowment or people remember, it's just so easily hidden by trees and everything. So
There's a really interesting New Yorker article on this very thing right now
oh wow.
about Greenwood Cemetery. If anyone gets that or can look it up online, because it talks about, they're like, how are we going to have this taken care of forever, basically? And they mentioned
Right.
like there was a high amount of cemeteries that were just becoming abandoned. So
Yeah.
And that's all the questions I've received so far. Any other questions from the group? You want to drop in the chat in the Q&A?
Oh, and we were going to say that. So Mary Fleck and Judy Bentley, who came with us to look at the spaces, thank you so much for them for joining us today and helping with this research. And I was going to say, I know Mary is writing a book about Sisters of Providence, if she wanted to share any about that.
Or we don't need to put it on the spot.
Oh, okay.
If
I don't
she
want to put
wanted
you on
to,
the
I can't.
spot. Yeah.
So everyone is muted.
Oh, I didn't see you.
Okay. Yeah, it's okay.
Well, she is writing. So there we go. There may be a really interesting topic coming down the line to shed more light on the Sisters of Providence.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if people can see in the chat, but we're putting the ticket link in there. So we've basically taken this presentation, turned it more theatrical and out on the streets. We'll walk around the Georgetown South Seattle College campus, walk across East Marginal Way, go back into the industrial area, and we've got old photos and maps and things, and then some surprising guests from beyond who will share their stories. So the tickets link is there in the chat. Please come if you want to. We would love to see you in the real world and show you kind of what we've uncovered with all this research. So
see the actual spaces and walk them with us. So yes, very exciting.
And yeah, like Elka mentioned, we have a podcast coming out July 7th or 8th,
Mhm.
which will be this interview we just did with the King County Medical Examiner. And then, yeah, we'll be back with our next season in September.
Exciting.
And Mary has her hand up, and I'm assuming, Mary, if I allow you to talk,
There we go.
do you want to go ahead and
Yeah,
talk?
can you hear me all right?
Yep.
We
Yeah, you
can.
sound great.
Hey.
Well, I just want to mention that when the sisters came, um, they came with a lot of excitement because the bishop had told them there's this great location. It's just 6 miles south of Seattle, and there's going to be a railroad nearby, a train. And there was a train. There was a little train that was going around to Newcastle to get coal and bring it to Seattle. So it was kind of a modern and exciting thing that, hey, we're going to be in this city that's growing and that has a train nearby. But it actually, there was also a racetrack nearby. And on the weekends, people would come from Seattle and go to the racetrack. But it turned out that it wasn't such a good location for the sisters because of the cemetery nearby, as you mentioned. And in the first year, the sisters lost 1/3 of their patients died. And so they started to have this reputation of being a place where you would get sent if you were going to die. And I think that was part of what motivated them to move into the Seattle. They did continue to have the poor farm under contract, but they took care of patients in Seattle.
Yeah. Wow, that's so
Oh,
interesting.
excellent.
Yeah,
We
just
really appreciate that insight.
well, yeah, I guess it would be very, what's the word? Like disconcerting if you went to the hospital and then there was a like old rickety,
Right.
like Potter's Field, like this
Right
not
there.
very well tended graveyard or cemetery, like right next door. I guess that probably
Yeah.
would be not providing good care, like of people's, yeah. So
So there are a few more questions.
okay.
One is, did the Sisters of Providence discriminate against non-white individuals when providing treatment?
I don't
Well,
think so.
I
Mary
know,
might be able to shed more light on this, but I don't think because it said they had a bunch of like
Yeah.
immigrants, mainly immigrants that they were treating.
yeah, in the first 14 months, they had some Black patients and some Native American patients as well. I think they had one woman most, but all were male. And then the uh, people from the newspaper came out to inspect it, and they found everything was bright and clean. There were 8 men there. One of them had had his left leg amputated because of a cancer on his thigh, and they found him sitting under a tree making himself a pair of crutches. And the laborers
Oh
were
my God.
harvesting a crop of oats.
Wow. Oh my gosh, Mary, we'd love to see these records or learn more about
This is so
because
great.
some of these people did end up being buried at the Potter's Field. We could cross-reference with our list
That's right.
and just see if we can glean some more information about them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I
we
have
should meet up again.
I have one more question here. Have you explored the cemetery in Renton on Monster Road? Contains the graves of the Monster family, including a headstone for baby Monster. I'd like to know more about that one.
That sounds
Oh my
fascinating. I don't know.
gosh, Carrie,
I've
that
never
sounds
heard
like
of that.
me
Right down
either.
Monster Road Cemetery.
Yeah, here is that. How do you spell that? Is it
Just Monster, yeah.
just
It's
M-O-N?
just Monster, Monster is what I see
Gosh,
here.
thank you for the suggestion because no, we don't know about
The
that
baby
one.
monster. That would be a good Halloween
That would be-
episode.
And it's Renton, yeah.
Yeah.
Renton is what
Is
the
that where Jimi Hendrix is buried?
Well, he's at Mount, I think he's
Yeah.
at Mount Olivet.
Oh,
he?
is he on all of that?
Remember-
I was trying to
but-
remember. That's where they have the indigent remains burial ceremony at Mount Olivet. And I did go the other year. We weren't able to attend this year's, unfortunately, because of timing, but yeah, in another 2 years, they'll have another one.
Yeah.
Renton Cemetery. I love it.
Yeah.
So we love getting
Well, yeah,
suggestions for
Look that up and
it could
we
be
could come
a good
back.
podcast, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, well,
Mhm.
feel free to reach out to us by email or
Mhm.
check us out on our social media.
Yep, we love connecting with people and fellow attendees interested in history and other stuff. So
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. And
Yeah.
we encourage everyone to listen to your podcast and check out one of your live tours. So thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here tonight.
Oh,
Thank
thank you so
you. Yeah.
much for having us. Yeah. And thank you everybody who attended.